Most people believe retirement will somehow work itself out, but the truth is far more unsettling. In America today, there are 5 completely different financial realities people fall into after they stop working, and most people are already heading toward one of them without realizing it. A while ago, I had a moment that honestly unsettled me. I was looking at retirement statistics late one night, the kind of thing most people avoid thinking about until they absolutely have to. And suddenly a strange thought hit me. Millions of people are moving toward retirement every single day without really knowing what their financial life will look like when they get there. Not the dream version we see in commercials, I mean the real version. Will retirement mean peaceful mornings, traveling, and financial security? Or will it mean quietly worrying about whether your Social Security check can cover rent, groceries, and medication in the same month? The shocking part is this: most people have no clear idea which future they're actually heading toward. There isn't just one retirement outcome. There are several very different financial realities people land in when they stop working. And once I started digging into the numbers, I realized something that genuinely surprised me. There are essentially 5 distinct retirement levels, 5 completely different financial worlds, and the gap between the lowest and the highest is almost impossible to comprehend. But before we explore them together, welcome to the channel. If you enjoy thoughtful conversations about money, life planning, and understanding the systems that shape our future, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next videos. Because once you see these 5 levels, you start to wonder which one you're quietly moving toward right now. Once I began looking closer at those 5 retirement levels, the first 2 were the ones that stayed in my mind the longest. The lowest level is often described as survival retirement. It's the reality where someone reaches retirement age with little to no savings, typically less than $50,000. In many cases, the only steady income becomes Social Security. And while Social Security plays an important role in supporting retirees, the average benefit is often somewhere around $1,900 a month. When I really paused to think about that number, it felt sobering. Housing costs alone in many parts of the country can come dangerously close to that amount. And retirement, of course, involves more than housing. There are groceries, utilities, transportation, insurance premiums, and healthcare expenses that Medicare doesn't fully cover. What struck me wasn't just the math. It was the vulnerability built into that situation. When almost every dollar is already spoken for, there's very little room for life's surprises. The next level, which I would call subsistence retirement, is slightly more stable but still fragile. Here, someone may have managed to save somewhere between $50,000 and $250,000, combined with Social Security. That might produce a monthly income between roughly $2,000 and $2,700. On paper, that can look manageable. But it's a delicate balance. A major medical expense, a home repair, or a period of higher inflation can quickly shift the numbers. As I reflected on these 2 levels, one lesson became very clear to me. Entering retirement with debt can make an already tight situation far more stressful than it needs to be. And that realization led me to wonder something else entirely. What level of savings actually allows retirement to feel stable rather than uncertain? That question led me to the 3rd level, and this is where the entire conversation about retirement starts to feel different. This is what many planners would describe as a comfortable retirement. It's the point where retirement stops feeling like a fragile balancing act and starts to resemble something stable, something you can actually breathe inside of. Financially, this level usually means entering retirement with somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million invested. At first glance, those numbers can feel intimidating. I remember thinking the same thing when I first saw them. But once I began looking at how retirement income is typically structured, the picture became clearer. One guideline that often appears in retirement planning is the 4% rule. The idea is that if someone withdraws roughly 4% of their invested assets each year, historically, there's a strong chance the portfolio can sustain decades of retirement. So if someone retired with $500,000 invested, That could generate around $20,000 per year, or roughly $1,600 per month. Combine that with Social Security income, and suddenly, total monthly income begins moving into the range where life feels manageable rather than precarious. At the higher end, someone retiring with $1 million invested could withdraw over $3,000 per month from investments alone, before even factoring in Social Security. When I ran those numbers for the first time, what struck me wasn't extravagance. It was peace of mind. Bills can be paid without constant anxiety. Unexpected expenses don't instantly threaten the entire plan. There's room for the occasional trip or simply the ability to enjoy a normal life without doing mental math every time you walk into a grocery store. But the deeper realization came when I started asking how people actually reach this level. Again and again, the answer wasn't brilliance or perfect timing. It was consistency. People who quietly invest month after month, year after year, letting compound interest slowly do the heavy lifting. It's not dramatic, and it rarely makes headlines, but over the decades it has changed the entire trajectory of retirement. And once I understood what a comfortable retirement could look like, it naturally raised another question in my mind. What happens when someone moves beyond stability and into true financial freedom? This is where the fourth level begins to appear, which many would call a prosperous retirement. At this stage, someone might retire with somewhere between $1 and $3 million invested. What fascinated me when I looked at these numbers wasn't just the size of the portfolio, but the shift in how money functions in someone's life. Using a conservative withdrawal approach, a portfolio of $1.5 million could produce roughly $5,000 a month in retirement income. A $3 million portfolio might generate closer to $10,000. When that is combined with Social Security benefits, total monthly income can easily move into the range of $7,000 to $15,000. And something interesting happens psychologically at this level. Money stops being about covering basic needs or avoiding risk. Instead, it becomes about choices. People begin thinking about travel not as an occasional luxury, but as a regular part of life. They may help children or grandchildren financially, donate to causes they care about, or spend more time pursuing interests that were always postponed during working years. Beyond that sits the final level, sometimes described as legacy retirement. Here, retirees may have $3 million or more invested, sometimes far more. At that stage, the focus often shifts away from personal lifestyle entirely. Instead, the conversation becomes about impact and legacy. How do you pass wealth to the next generation responsibly? How do you structure trusts, gifts, or charitable donations? How do you ensure that your money does something meaningful long after you're gone? It's a completely different financial world. Seeing all 5 of these levels laid out as this left me with a question that felt impossible to ignore. What actually separates the people who end up struggling in retirement from the ones who reach that stable middle ground, or even move beyond it? At first, it's tempting to assume the answer must be income, that people who reach higher levels simply earn far more money during their working years. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized that the explanation doesn't fully hold up. Plenty of high earners still arrive at retirement unprepared, and at the same time, many middle-income households manage to build surprisingly solid financial foundations over time. The real difference, more often than not, comes down to behavior repeated over decades. Starting early makes an enormous difference. Someone who begins investing at 25 is giving compound interest 40 years to quietly do its work. Someone who waits until 45 is suddenly trying to compress that entire process into half the time. Consistency matters just as much. Regular contributions, even modest ones, have a way of accumulating into something meaningful when they're sustained long enough. It's not exciting. It rarely feels dramatic in the moment, but over time, it reshapes the outcome. And perhaps most importantly, patience matters. Markets rise and fall. Economic cycles come and go, but those who stay invested and continue building over the long run tend to benefit from the steady force of compounding. When I step back and look at these 5 retirement levels, the biggest realization is that retirement is rarely decided in a single moment. It is quietly shaped by thousands of small decisions made over decades. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Start early, stay consistent, and let time work on your side. Even modest investments, repeated patiently, can change the entire direction of your future. Instead of waiting for the perfect time, begin building the habit today. Because the earlier the journey starts, the easier the path becomes. I'm curious about your perspective. Which retirement level do you think you're currently moving toward? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments so everyone can learn from each other's experiences. And if you enjoy thoughtful discussions like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps keep the channel growing and motivates us to keep creating more useful content in the future.